has had a big year. So I don't know if you all heard of us in the newspaper or seen us on social media, but we've been doing a lot of good stuff this year. We were fortunate enough to have Dr. Flowers at our Memorial Day event this year. It was a great event. So we asked her to be our speaker at one of our events, and here we are. So NAMI Athens, for those of you who are not familiar, NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We exist to provide support, education, and advocacy for people with mental illness and their loved ones. We've been around since 1997, and we do a support group twice a month for folks with loved ones who suffer with mental illness. We have some information about where those are. If you'd like to join us, we have one next Thursday. And we just wrapped up our family to family class this year. It was a great class. We had 14 individuals that sat with us for 8 weeks and learned about mental illness and how to cope with what their loved ones are going through and how to help their loved ones. So hoping to do that again in the spring. Lots of good stuff happening. So if you don't already follow us on social media, please do. We also are on Give Pulse on the Ohio University, their page for finding events. Also, I always forget to mention this, if you happen to think about it, link your Kroger card to NAMI Athens. We could always use your support. Every little donation counts, and believe it or not, those pennies do add up, and we get a little bonus that helps us put on some events throughout the year. So when you think about it next, sit down and make sure your Kroger card is linked to NAMI Athens. We have our annual meeting in December. That's open to anyone who would like to join us. It's a board meeting. We're going to have cookies, and we're doing it at the community center this year. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Amanda Flowers. She was generous enough to come down from Columbus tonight to speak with us. She spent her lifetime advancing racial equity and social justice in marginalized communities. She is a McNair scholar at Kent, is a clinician, currently does clinical work, does addiction research and behavioral health research, volunteers. She's on the board of the Tabortown Museum of Color, People of Color Museum, and she even has time to do dog training, which is pretty amazing. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Amanda Flowers.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So thank you so much for that introduction, and it's truly an honor. As she said, I live in Columbus, but I am from Southeast Ohio, from Cutler, actually, if people have heard of that. And so it's always an honor to come back home and speak before everyone. And actually, I didn't drive down this evening. I came down. I had a couple of events to do over the weekend, so it's been really fun because I got to stay and visit with people and see everyone. So this was such a wonderful invitation for me for many reasons. But I'm excited to talk to you tonight in trying to gather a better understanding of the unique challenges, stressors, and traumas that's experienced by military service members from the time of their deployment and through combat, as well as learning some of the common mental health challenges, symptoms, and hardships faced by veterans and the things that they have to adjust to when after being discharged and returning back to civilian life. And then also learning some of the historical and socio-cultural factors that are related to mental health of Black service members and veterans. And this topic is really important to me. My father was a Vietnam veteran, a Marine, and some of these stressors, he didn't talk about it much. As most people know, combat veterans don't say a whole lot, but just in learning and gathering things over the years, he suffered from the trauma that he experienced when he was in Vietnam. He did 2 tours there, and then he ended up with lung cancer that was 100% service connected. It was due to the Agent Orange. And so he passed away from that. But talking about, this is one of my most favorite groups to talk about, come from a long line of military members in my family and community and things. So I'm excited that we're talking about this topic tonight. And And so just for us specifically and where we're at in this day and age, after enduring 2 decades of ongoing warfare in Afghanistan, we're at a time where individuals with personal military connections are raising significant concerns about the mental health need of service members and veterans alike. And while general military service can bring rise to some, mental health conditions, just being in the service in general, those who are deployed into wartime are more likely to experience mental health issues than general civilians. And there's a rising population of veterans who are currently seeking mental health treatment, with the majority of them having had been deployed and in combat. And I just want to point out, just because people are seeking and these things are on the radar, just from the beginning of this and from all of my life and knowing what I've known, that does not mean that these guys are getting what they need or what they deserve. But there are some strides being made, supposedly to help with that. So in fact, 1 in 5 war veterans, and the most recent data was looked at from the veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or major depressive disorder. And still, the Department of Veterans Affairs reports that fewer than 50% of returning veterans who are in need of mental health services actually receive them. So less than half of the people get them that really, really need them. And mental illness among veterans is very profound, as we can see, and often overlooked. It's an often overlooked consequence of military service and the far-reaching effects of it on someone's overall well-being and daily lives is just very, very huge. In fact, veterans experience a unique set of challenges, stressors, and traumas during their tours of duty that may lead to hardships with reintegrating back into their communities after leaving the military. So specifically, military personnel can be exposed to an array of potentially traumatizing experiences when deployed during wartime and may witness severe injuries or violent deaths. That these things coming from combat, firing weapons, witnessing others getting wounded or killed, and other stressors. Sometimes it's not even stressors directly related to their time in the service, and other times there are other stressors that's during their time but unrelated to combat. And these are things like sexual trauma, and that's not just for the women, some of the men too. Suicidality, acute stress disorder, the post-traumatic stress disorder that we've talked about, depression, anxiety, sleep problems, psychotic and addictive disorders, interpersonal violence, and traumatic brain injury. And veterans are struggling post-military, and mental health conditions seem to be the largest contributing factor to this. And so mental illnesses may cause veterans to feel isolated and lonely. It can affect their ability to hold a steady job, or even to take classes. I never will forget one veteran I was working with was telling me he had to sit in a certain place in the room, and this room would have been hard for him to sit because every seat in here, the back is turned towards the door. So he would have probably had to have taken a seat over in here and turned around, just because of the trauma from the war. He could not sit with his back facing the door. And could you imagine just dealing with stuff like that all through life, things that the rest of us take for granted, but the different things that they've experienced that just, unless you've went through it, you'll never understand it. And so without a support system and stable employment, these individuals are at higher risk for being homeless and having economic insecurity. So, and as a matter of fact, between like 2001 and 2020, the frequency of veteran mental health issues and substance use disorders increased from 27.9% to 41.9%. And so we're not doing a better job at this. If anything, we're doing a better job of maybe collecting information, but we're clearly not helping it at all. And so, and I shouldn't say that. There are people who are doing great things and great work, but as a country as a whole, we are definitely not resolving this issue for these people that serve for us. And also the heightened risk for suicide is 1.5 times more for veterans than it is for civilians. And and then if there's not the post-deployment psychological and social support, this increases the risk for PTSD and many other things. So while caring for veterans, whether that's in a professional manner or even in our homes or in our families, while caring for them, we need to consider the physical injuries that they may have sustained during their service period, but also the emotional wounds that they may have been experienced then and presently. So the presentations of these different mental health concerns don't follow a specific timeline either. There are people who seem like as soon as they come home from the military, they're doing fine. That's how they feel. And a few years down the road, they may start having flashbacks and nightmares. And then there are others who come home from the war and start to have challenges from the beginning. There are some, one person told me, I asked them to speak on a radio show I had about this topic, and what he said to me, now this is a very, very faithful man. I mean, you call him, and his mom and his grandma were preachers, so he knows this Bible inside and out. And when I said, hey, will you come on our radio show and talk about this? He said, I am not healed enough for that. I am still too hurt and traumatized. He said, you're going to have to take somebody that is very, very close to God and has healed spiritually to be able to come on your show and talk about this. And I found that person, and they did come on the show and talk about it, and they were really spiritually aligned, but they also said that is what helped them. And both of them talked about, you'll never understand what it's like to lay on the ground with bullets going past you, and you're just calling on the name of the Lord to save you through these situations. And so for my dad, he experienced the trauma related to this for 40 years. It was not too long before he passed away that I think he truly came to terms with this, and that was when he spoke to when you're going through to see if your health problems are service connected. So when he was getting all of the testing done for the cancer, he also had to talk to a psychologist, and at that point he finally, after 40 years, let it all out, and I think that was his healing point from the PTSD, but it took that long. And if he wouldn't have had to see the doctor for the cancer, I'm confident he may have never overcome that. So that's just, there's no time limits of how this happens, but it can create very stressful periods for these individuals and also for family members. And you know, I feel like a lot of times the closer proximity they are to the combat, but you know, transitioning into civilian life and then all the years to come, it doesn't just go away for the most part, I would say. And so when we're talking about what are some of the most prevalent or most common, mental health challenges that our combat veterans especially are facing, post-traumatic stress disorders we've been talked about, and this is characterized by intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, and nightmares related to past trauma that leads to avoidance of reminders of these incidents, hypervigilance, sleep difficulties. It can lead to severe anxiety and making it difficult for veterans to maintain relationships, hold down jobs, or even leave their home. A lot of people have social anxiety where they really don't want to go out to any stores for this. And it's caused by, well, people don't have to go be in the military to get PTSD. There are many ways you can get it, but for the veterans, you know, it's caused by their traumatic experiences during their service. And they may relive these traumatic events through these flashbacks and nightmares. And the most significant predictors of PTSD sometimes and how you know, the extent to which it will be is the frequency and the intensity of their combat exposure. And it significantly disrupts their lives and manifests in ways to affect them psychologically, emotionally, physically, behaviorally, and then their cognitive functioning and things as well. And so for the people who relive these events a lot or live them over and over again, this sense of threat that they are experiencing is just as intense as the original trauma. And so I don't know if anyone here has ever seen someone go into a flashback, but they really are completely back in that moment. And it takes a lot to pull them back into the present time. So that's why it's so hard for them or so threatening or brings so much trauma. It makes them relive the trauma all over again. And so this is an interesting piece about post-traumatic stress disorder. It was officially recognized in the DSM-3, which is the mental health book for diagnosing, in 1980. And it was driven partly by the socio-political aftermath of the Vietnam War. But its manifestations have been alluded to in different forms all throughout history, with terms such as a soldier's heart during the Civil War, and it was called shell shock in the First World War, and then it became known as combat fatigue during the Vietnam War. So that's interesting just to hear, you know, the different terms that have been used all through the years. And still today, people have challenges of how should we categorize this, you know, because everyone's situation can look a little bit different. And so, and, you know, and there are some who may experience like transient numbness or heightened emotions with the nightmares and anxiety and all of that. But within a month, the symptoms can resolve. And then there's others, like 10 to 20% of cases from the research I've done. But from the people I've talked to, I'd say it's bigger than 10 to 20%, because you talk to people and it seems like the majority of people who have gone into combat have some type of something left over from this, and a lot of times it's within the realm of trauma, but their symptoms may worsen and become persistent and cause significant impairment for years and years to come. And there are several risk factors that exist before, during, and after experiencing traumatic events. And some of the factors related to post-traumatic stress disorder include having a lower rank in the military. So this just shows us, outside of combat, how traumatizing the military experience can be in and of itself. But having a lower rank, being unmarried, having a low level of education, being close to the enemy who you've been fighting, experiencing low morale or low social support, and being unaware of common psychological reactions that they were going to experience when they return home. Childhood trauma places individuals at a higher risk of developing PTSD. And then other risk factors that may be present before they experience the trauma include being a female, belonging to an ethnic minority group, having a lower level of education, being enlisted, having a combat specialty, having undergone multiple deployments for longer periods, experiencing prior adverse life events, and having pre-existing psychological problems. And then, although depression does not get the same level of attention as PTSD does when it comes to speaking of military veterans, people, it still has a significant impact on military veterans' lives. So those deployed to different conflict zones away from their families and exposed to various stressors face an increased risk of experiencing major depressive disorder. And they get it due to the challenges for reintegrating back into civilian life, loss of some of their camaraderie, loss of a sense of purpose, and then leaving that structured environment of the military. It is hard for some to adapt back to living a flexible lifestyle as well. And these can all contribute to the feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Research shows that 15% of troops who return from deployment have symptoms consistent with major depressive disorder, and that depression is responsible for 9% of all ambulatory military health network appointments. So while people are in service, 9% of the appointments are due to major depressive disorder. And as a matter of fact, just for I don't want to call it a fun fact, it's not fun, but for a fact here, Gulf War veterans have a risk of suffering from depression that is more than twice that of the general population. So I know we've talked some about, mentioned Vietnam and mentioned, the most recent wars, but, the Gulf War veterans, this was, during my lifetime as well. And so speaking to my friend that I was talking about that was like, hey, I'm not healed enough to come on your show, he was a Gulf War veteran. And so just to kind of bring all of that for full circle. And so for this, of course, factors such as separation from loved ones and the stressors of combat increase the risk for depression. And it can appear in forms of like being fatigued, having insomnia, having weight changes, having difficulty concentrating, feeling worthless, just feeling sad and drugged down all of the time. And so numerous risk factors can predispose individuals to major depressive disorders, such as encompassing job or relationship stressors, being unemployed. A lot of people forget the fact that when someone leaves the military and comes back home, they don't automatically have a job and money. So there are a lot of stressors with that. And then again, trying to find a job in which they're comfortable working. They have so many skills, but finding a job in which they are comfortable working physically and mentally, depending on what they've gone through, that can be stressful. Sometimes if being a female or being a person of color, there are extra stressors added to that. One time a professor was talking to me about my dad being in the, serving during the time of the Vietnam War. And they said, do you realize, hey, our country treated them horribly when they returned. Now it didn't matter who they were. Our country did a disservice in how they treated the Vietnam veterans when they came home. And, so not only were they all just experiencing people spitting on them and throwing things at them, and I'll get to questions at the end of it, and all of those things, they also, people who, like my dad, who was a black man during the time of, the civil rights era, and that going through all of this too, there was kind of a double whammy. First of all, our country didn't appreciate them going and putting their lives on the lines, but they didn't want them in our country anyway. They were ready to send us back to Africa, as they would, well, some still say it, but, as they were going, they didn't want us. They wanted us, they were mad because we weren't enslaved anymore and all of that stuff. So, and that was just talking about my dad. Think about the wars and how these things were more intensified before that. There are stories of the World War II veterans who came back and people were jumping them, and there were riots and things just based around they didn't want the black soldiers to be in this certain area. And so there are all kinds of things that contribute to these types of challenges. And then there's suicide. And so over the past 20 years, suicide rates have been steadily increasing. And so right now, veteran suicide rates have reached their highest level in recorded history, with over 6,000 veterans dying by suicide annually. And so according to a study across 27 states, it's estimated that pretty much 18% of all reported cases are from veterans. That's approximately almost 20 deaths per 100,000 service members each year. And again, like I was saying before, the deaths or the rates of veteran suicides are 1.5 times greater than that of non-veterans. And so, and then when it comes to female veterans, they're 2.5 times at a 2.5 time greater risk of committing suicide because of the things they've went through that all veterans go to, but just because they were a woman going through this too, and there's another layer of discrimination and things that they experienced from that. And so, and when we're talking about things that happen that just kind of lingers around and wants to make these veterans think about suicide. When we're talking about, the different types of harm that they went through, or the different types of weapons they were exposed to, and so acquiring firearms, and then you will see some of them who will be buying firearms now, or drafting a will, starting to give their personal things away, or you'll start maybe seeing like rope burns or scars on their arms, wrists, neck, anywhere on their body. So if you have a loved one in your life who's a military veteran and you're starting to see some of these patterns, it might be might be beneficial to check in with them about this. Substance use as well, and that includes, illicit drugs and legal drugs and alcohol. These develop as a coping mechanism. We're talking about these people who are not getting treatment for the trauma that they experience, so they self-medicate. And they self-medicate well. When we think about people with substance use problems, we always think about the person who is drunk or on drugs and can't function and things like that. Sometimes that happens here too, but these are also the people that drink every day, but go to work every day, take care of all the responsibilities at home every day, but they still have to drink or smoke or do something to take that edge off, even if it's the very last thing they do in the day, especially if there's a chance of them laying down at night and having some of these nightmares and things. And I will admit, within my family alone, there have been a lot of drinkers. Thank goodness. These particular veterans didn't have the drug addictions, but some real close to me had alcohol problems, all related to this, but they coped very well in their life in terms of raising their family and taking care of, work and all of those types of things. And so, but the drug use that's a conversation that can go many different directions. And then there are other problems, anxiety disorders, where they're just worried all the time about things, or like I was saying, can't leave their house. They have more social phobias. The traumatic brain injuries related to explosions, and different things that they experienced. And then also the military sexual trauma, the sexual harassment and assault that happens when they're in there. And I never spoken to someone about that directly, but in speaking to people who have spoken, to them on that, it seems like the sexual trauma, we would be amazed if we truly could understand how much and how often this has happened. And so, then we talk about them transitioning out of active duty. So consider what loneliness could feel like to a veteran. After serving your country, you're and having surrounded and supported all of your team members, you return to a civilian life where you feel like there's absolutely no one to talk to. No one understands what you've lived through. No one understands the inner turmoil you feel or your inability to quiet the voices that are in your head, sometimes the voices in your head telling you to kill yourself. And you have a sense of being misunderstood. You don't think anyone understands you, and actually, probably most don't unless they've gone through it. And you believe you're the only one who feels a certain way. And so recent studies identified loneliness as the main cause of suicidal thinking among thousands of older soldiers, and even some who had not experienced direct combat. So even the ones who were there during peacetime, the experience of being in the military, there are certain things that can be a bit traumatizing just from being there altogether. And then when they come back, they feel like they're lonely because they don't have anyone to talk to about these things. And, but especially for the ones who have been in combat, loneliness may persist for decades after someone has left the service, and it's ranked higher than post-traumatic stress disorder, disability, or psychiatric problems, and contributing significantly to the risk of developing suicidal thinking. And then every year, approximately 200,000 men and women transition out of active duty service and return to civilian life. And so this adjustment requires veterans and their families to reorient their lives across multiple domains, including employment, finances, housing, social supports, and health. And transitions for veterans can especially be burdensome due to shifting from the unique collective cultures of military service to shaping a more individualized role in how they live, work, and interact with others. And I had one person tell me, I got to speak to a husband and a wife, and it's just so much all the way around. The wife was talking to me about how it was difficult. She appreciated him for his service, but she felt like he left her. He left her to raise the kids, and she did this on her own while he was, overseas. And then he came back home and tried to step back in like nothing happened and parent his kids and exude his authority, not in a negative way. He's just coming in being a husband and a dad. And that was hard for her to deal with because she was upset with him because he had abandoned her with these children the whole time. So she had to work through those types of challenges. And then he had to work through the challenges of feeling like I abandoned my family while I was over here doing, all of these things. I'm coming back home. I'm kind of a little lost as to what's going on or what's happening. Hey, my wife's been taking care of everything, and I'm trying to step in and help and do my best. And he felt like he was fumbling and dropping the ball because he wasn't sure what all to do or sometimes how to communicate and things like that. And so it was challenging on both ends. So just kind of, I'm saying all that to say, when we're talking about reintegrating back into civilian life and coming back into home, even within your family, who you're closest to, it can be a tricky situation, for all parties to be dealing with. And and they face challenges, other types of challenges when transitioning, back into home. As I've mentioned, some of the schoolwork, the things with families, also integrating and doing fun things with, friends again. Sometimes you don't realize, depending on how long they were gone, what areas people grow in and grow away from and things too. So this is returning to civilian life can be stressful in many types of ways. And then there's stigma around what veterans face from friends, family, employers, and others because of their mental health needs. And people will sometimes assume that they're just treatment seeking or drug seeking a lot of times too, and especially when we're talking about veterans of color. And so stigma is a sociocultural barrier affecting access to care. And there's a strong stigma attached to seeking mental health care in the military. And a lot of veterans carry that back to civilian life. It's hard to separate that. Veterans report that stigma, when they're serving, that, there's stigma there because they're discouraged from reporting medical issues, and they are chastised for demonstrating, any mental health challenges and told that they're weak and they need to suck it up and keep driving on and different things like that. So, when they are discouraged from pretty much, hey, you're a man, they're told you're a man, take it like a man. And then they come back home, they're still trying to take it like a man. It's completely viewed as a negative thing for them to get help for physical and mental problems. And a lot of them are concerned because when they're in the military, if there's a reported physical or mental health problem on record, then that can make it so they can't get a future job or a future assignment because they don't like having all these check marks next to people's names. And that's something new that I've learned more recently. When it comes to the stigma part, is just how much they were discouraged to talk about these things or to get help for these things in the military, and then why there's the stigma there today too. And then we also have unique populations. I've mentioned women and racial and ethnic minorities, also the homeless veterans, and just the different, each person is unique. And when we see different disparities across the general population, those same groups of people experience these things as a veteran, but everything is just intensified because of the experiences that they've been going through. And so, just due to the different ways that they receive treatment or are offered treatment, the different ways that they are discriminated against when trying to get housing needs met, and and get different benefits and things. All of that is present, depending on which unique population that someone is from. And then finally, going into the last section of this, talking some about the experiences of Black service members and veterans. And to be honest, this section, I have a whole different presentation. Actually, it's 3 hours long, talking about the military, the Black military history, starting from the very beginning and going all the way through. And I made the presentation for, it was students who were in a high school dropout recovery school. And let me tell you, this is probably the most honorable presentation that I've ever given, because we're talking about kids, students, high school students these students were in the inner city. All of them, I think, were over the age of 18, because they're just trying to come back and finally graduate from having dropped out and things. And no one had talked to them about any of that ever in life. And to see the inspiration come to them when they realized what their people had done all throughout history, fighting for our country. The only people anyone ever talks about are the Tuskegee Airmen, and I don't want to say only, I love them. I'm a member of the Memorial Group in Columbus, so I love them, but that's the only people they generally tend to say much about. And so, I I got on my tangent. What I was going to say is this is truly worth a presentation in and of itself. Bringing in some of that history and then talking about, cultural stuff that plays a role in this and things. So this is just truly a splash in the bucket for this aspect of it. But when equitable mental health care requires that different populations and subgroups of users should be able to afford equal access to care within the given system. But there are barriers to this, for certain populations, and this includes Black service members and veterans that that they are not getting all of the services that they are provided. Now, veterans in general aren't getting what they deserve either, but then adding an extra layer to this for this specific part of the conversation. So upon returning from service, it's no secret to most that veterans often wrestle with varying mental health challenges. And while the difficulties of our Black service members face when defending our country are disproportionate. And so the challenges and disadvantages that they face during their period of transitioning back into civilian life makes them even more vulnerable to mental health challenges. And so despite making up around 12% of the U.S. Veteran population, that's 2 million Black veterans as of 2022, they suffer from immoderately high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder and also experience poor clinical outcomes compared to their white counterparts. And so these groups also report the highest delays in care when seeking mental health treatment, and in many cases, they're far less likely to receive treatment. And if that wasn't enough, studies report that Black veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder are less likely to be awarded disability benefits than white veterans. Beyond limited access to health care and benefits, Black veterans also experience a wide array of legal hurdles and social stigmatization associated with obtaining alternative therapies. And it should be no surprise that due to these countless hurdles, it's often too late for Black veterans to receive the help they're entitled to by the time they finally get to that point. We're only as strong as the most vulnerable fraction of our society, so we cannot improve the lives of veterans without improving these communities at large. And a part of this is advocating for our Black veterans, and not just our Black veterans, our women veterans, our other special populations when it comes into veterans, and all veterans of color. We need to advocate for all of these unique unique groups. And then there are also disparities in the diagnosis of veterans. And so Black veterans are more frequently diagnosed and treated for psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, while white veterans with the same symptoms are most likely treated for affective disorders such as both bipolar disorder and depression. And we see these same things in traditional psychology. There are all these biases based on race for how people are diagnosed, and the same thing happens with the veteran population. And so, in addition to that, there are disparities in treatment. And so, again, people trying to access care, having to wait in longer lines, sitting in the waiting room and see people coming after you who don't look like you, but now they're getting served. And some of the veterans I've talked to, just the system in and of itself to get an appointment, and I don't know, you have to have some type of a number and you use this number to schedule some appointments, but you get different number to schedule different appointments, and it's not an easy system to access. And then, you know, you live somewhere like here, and you're gonna have to drive to Chillicothe or Columbus or somewhere to get help if you qualify for services through veterans, because everyone can't even get services through the VA. There are some people that deserve services through the VA, but then they say different things like they make too much money and they're not eligible for these services. But then you hear other people, and I'm not saying this to down the VA. I've had good experiences going into VAs, but there's also the people that's like, well, they should be really happy they have another type of insurance to cover their stuff because the VA is not getting us what we need. So it's kind of challenging on, you know, on all ends and seeing all the way around for these veterans, you know, and not feeling like they're getting the different services that they need. And then, you know, just different in all kinds of ways, every way you can look at it. And then Black veterans are less likely to be granted a service connection for PTSD than other veterans. And, you know, it's like, how would their trauma not be related to the military if the next person's is? So, you know, that's another area where just having things being service connected, there are disparities within that. And then also, grant rates for disability compensation are lower for Black veterans than they are for white veterans, and trying to get all the paperwork and things to go through. And then Black veterans are denied VA health benefits more often than white veterans. And so, you know, again, it's one of those things where they, you know, again, there are people who served for us, put their lives on the line for us. And then, you know, I will always say this, I will always honor my veterans, because I feel like we can continue to keep doing more and more and more as people and communities, and that doesn't mean like I said earlier, a lot of people are doing a lot of things, but when we're talking about people and communities and the country, you know, as a whole and things, there's just so much more room for improvement in this area. And so that's all that I have for you guys today. It looks like we have like 6 minutes left. And I know you up here in front, you had a question. And then does anyone else have questions or comments or anything? Did you want to go first? Because I know you had a question.
Yes. My uncle served in the Vietnam War on the carrier USS Ranger. Mm-hmm. And he ended up he died about, how many years ago was it? Like 2 or 3 years ago from complications related to Lou Gehrig's disease. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We loved him. He was he was a nice person. And you mentioned the way Vietnam veterans were treated. Mm-hmm. He'd actually been kind of a hippie peace activist before he was deployed, and then he kind of, when he came home, all his friends basically abandoned him because they saw him as a baby killer.
Yeah.
And like I was reading about this of Vietnam vets, the issue is that it was kind of both sides of the political spectrum didn't like them. Conservatives were basically like, "You're cowards. You lost the war. It's because your generation is, all this." And then with the more liberal generation, the more liberal side, it was your baby killers. You did, the bidding of the war machine, etc. And so that obviously.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Because I'd never heard about it or thought about it from the spectrum on the political side. Like both sides were angry at him. So I'd never heard it explained like that. So thank you.
I was a history undergraduate, and I took a very long military history course on the Vietnam War. Interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And then you had.
Can you tell us some effective treatments, either with therapy or with drug intervention that has proven helpful for the vets?
Yes, and so it depends on the whole combination of experiences. But what I would say is getting into therapy with another veteran. It seems like veterans don't do as well if the psychologist or the counselor or whoever it is has never served. And that includes me. There is only so much so far I can go in a therapeutic conversation with somebody because I don't fully understand it. And there are some experiences that you can get away with that and treat people and work very well. But being in combat is not one of those. And the patients I've spoken with say that is really where they get their true healing, is when the therapist is a veteran, one. And then two, their medicines, it depends on the diagnosis as to what the medicine would be. The medicine is very helpful. The only thing with the medicine, sometimes they have to be cautious with it if they have an addictive personality as it is. And and when I say an addictive personality, those weren't the good words. Those weren't the words I should have used. If they suffer from addiction because they're trying to cover up the trauma is what I'm meaning more. And so medicine is a good thing, but that's something to really, talk about and figure out what works for you. And if a veteran is taking medicine and they don't feel comfortable on whatever they're taking, making sure that they're vocal about that so the medicine can be changed some. But the key thing I feel like is being in some type of a therapy or support group or something from other people who have shared these similar experiences. Yes.
One of the many things in your long list of reasons somebody might be more susceptible to trauma was lower educational status.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these high school seniors that are going out
Mm-hmm.
and registering
Mm-hmm.
and doing whatever. But also the other thing is, if you have a lower educational level, if you have a higher educational level, you're more likely to be officer, right?
Yes, you do get, from what I understand, you do get moved up higher if you have that, certain education levels as too. Certain education levels, yes.
Yeah, so is there anything to do with the kids who come out of high school?
Well, here's what I feel like. I've always felt like we're taking babies and putting them into the military. And then you have the ones who, my favorites, they're a bit ornery, and the kids that are getting in trouble in school. And then a lot of people take the little rotten ones and enlist them because they need to be shaken up and they need to get it together. And military is the way to kind of get them together. And so, here we are, we're taking, first of all, even for the healthiest of high school, we're taking babies and putting them in even boot camp, I couldn't make it through boot camp. But, we're putting them in that. And then you have others who, are going against the grain anyway, and then you're putting them in these things to, to whip them up and shape them together. And that doesn't mean those ones, sometimes those are some of your smartest children, but sometimes their grades are very poor because they're being the class clown instead of doing their work. And so there are certain contributors to that too. And where I always say the education level doesn't reflect how smart they are, but it can contribute to moving up the line in the military, which we were seeing like different ranks or lack thereof was making it, making people's challenges even, their mental health challenges even more severe. But then also after that, after going through all of that and coming out and seeing some people who have a certain level of education and were able to get a job easily, and this veteran probably has more skills than the college education person does. They could do way more things. They've been exposed to so much more, but they're not getting that same job because they want this piece of paper, to go along with it. And so that the education piece kind of falls all over the place, and asking, is there something that we can do about it? For me personally, I don't have any ideas on how we can fix that specifically. But what I do think is we need to do a better job of handling our veterans with care when they come back home. And maybe that would be a point to, to kind of intervene with the education piece, just like intervening with the housing piece and trying to find a job or, different things. And then we also have the piece where they come out and want to do like the GI Bill or different things and get an education, and I don't know, some people, I shouldn't probably describe it like this, but some people will just say they just lie to them because they don't have the opportunities to get the education that they were promised. When they, you go through and do this, and then you're going to be able to get this college degree, but they don't give them the stipends and stuff when they come home like they're supposed to get this. So the education piece is such a big topic and big thing to tackle. Yes.
And I think going along with the education piece, it's also the socioeconomic status.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to grad school in Texas, and a lot of people there went to the military just so they could pull their families out of poverty or be able to afford college or get an education. So a lot of people were going in high schools to the military. And that means like the families don't have the supports either to support them going through the journey or coming back. So it's also a result of the socioeconomics.
Yes.
And poverty.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. We are like at 7:03. I'm available. But I don't know if people need to leave, feel free to leave. If people have more questions, ask away, unless Jordan needs to kick me out. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Question. When you were talking about the transition back into civilian life, does the military provide any kind of assistance for that at all?
No.
No.
And one time I actually heard it described of as they brainwash them as they go in because they can't have them out there on the battlefield worrying about their family. They're not going to be able to focus to do what they need to do. So that's what this was a recruiter, how he described it. They brainwash them going in, but they don't remove the brainwashing when they come out. They just send them back out as they are and expect them to adapt.
Adjust, right?
Yes. So no, they don't do anything. And so one, they need to do something for them, but two, the family members. Helping because like I was saying, the poor woman who was frustrated because she felt like her husband had abandoned her and came back and trying to adjust, which it sounds crazy to us. And like, oh my gosh, they just went through that. I mean, I've never experienced it, but I would say with all the trauma she experienced of not knowing from day to day, was he still alive? What's going on? And just that whole mindset could easily lead to, you're back home and now I'm mad at you. You know, just kind of like when people pass away, it's very common. A part of the grief is to get mad at, you know, that person. And so, yeah, so there needs to be help with them and with family members for helping them reintegrate too. Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Yes. Any other? Yes.
Well, thank you for it's been really eye-opening to hear you talk about how this must be affecting so many people across the nation, because when I went to a Veterans Day event on Saturday, everyone who had somebody they knew in their family had to stand up, and the whole room stood up. And so it's making me realize that this is very private and personal, but yet national.
Yes.
And so one of the things that NAMI does is work to bust stigma, and wanted to ask you if with veterans for the general population, what kind of struggles have you encountered with needing to get over that hurdle of stigma so you can start talking about mental health?
Stigma is a challenging thing to get over, and I would say, so in general, stigma is challenging. But then when we talk about the veterans, there's the stigma that's there that I was talking about, where they are criticized for trying to get physical and mental health help. And so I would say that would be starting with the core of it, of letting them know you are not this horrible person for trying to get help. You're actually the hero for taking these steps to, try to get help. But also, so that's the piece in working with them, is just helping them get over that and understand that they are doing a wonderful thing, and celebrating the smallest steps. Some of them might make a phone call, but they're not going to step into that appointment. But we celebrate all the phone calls until we get into the office. And so it can be a small, tiny thing. People laugh at me because I relate a whole lot of things. So I don't have kids. I love kids, but I don't have my own. So the only people I have raised all by myself are my dogs. But I laugh a lot, and I'm like, man, if I had kids now, I don't need kids right now, but if I had kids now in life, I'd probably be so well prepared for them from doing the dog training. If you want them to sit and they just sit back, rock back like they're going to, you give them all kinds of treats for that and tell them how great they are just because they stumbled into what they're doing. They don't even know what they're doing. But you keep repeating that, rewarding them to the point that finally it's like, oh, I'm just gonna sit. I'm gonna sit all the time. I get treats for sitting. And I look at that, and then I look at how we raise humans, and it's like, man, if we could celebrate each other, and I'm talking about even raising adults, because we have to raise adults sometimes, but if we could celebrate all the small steps and all the moments, we never know what someone's going through. And sometimes it is that, hey, I love your shirt, that can make or break their day. And this is, I know you're asking about something different, but just sometimes that small thing. So I would say carrying the small rewards and small steps and breaking down the tasks that they need to do into very small, steps, and then celebrating it every step of the way. And then also, if there are opportunities to work with the people who are living with them, whether in their house or in their communities and things like that, and working with these people to let them know, hey, you do the same thing. Don't judge them because they're having A, B, or C. We can be so judgy sometimes. And because we just don't know, but working with both sides of it, the veterans and then also the family and community members. And so anything else? Yes.
I think that's another one too, that if you have a vet who is willing to talk to them and tell them it's okay if you need help. I did. That goes a lot farther than having 20 of us.
That's good. That's real good. Thank you. Anything else? Well, thank you guys so much for coming out.